The crankset is one of the main driving forces that propels all cyclists forward. It is an important part to any bike. So it comes to no surprise that when you begin to upgrade your bike, the crankset could be a major one that you can make. Now, depending on how much you spent on your bike initially, most bikes under $1,000 would most likely come with this basic square tapered bottom bracket and crankset. As you can see, it could potentially build up a lot of grease and dirt in the nooks and crannies if you don't maintain your bike regularly. So after a bit of research and shopping around, I stumbled upon this crankset. This is the Raceface Ride crankset. It comes in 3 pieces and is designed for a 10-speed 3x setup, but it can also be converted to a 1x. The external bottom bracket comes with 3 spacers and some instructions on where each spacer goes. This is important and I'll get back to that later on. The total weight of this crankset is 962 grams, at 170mm length. Now before we start to disassemble your current crankset, I would recommend cleaning up any loose dirt and grime just to make it a little easier to work with. We'll start with the drive side. Use the proper sized Allen key to remove the crank bolt, and either remove the chain or you can just get it out of the way. Then take a square tapered crank puller and insert it into the crank. Make sure to turn by hand before applying any significant pressure as to not cross thread any of the threads. At this point I couldn't get enough leverage, so I decided to use a hammer to give it some encouragement. Now apply the same technique to the other side. Now for the bottom bracket. Again, I was not able to get any leverage, so I found that by flipping my bike upside down and using an old pipe, in this case an old seat post, I could use it to gain enough leverage to remove the bottom bracket. Compared to the new crankset, we can see the old one weighs a bit heavier, at 1043 grams. Keep in mind that the new one has all 3 chain rings and will be even lighter when we remove 2. Before installing the new bottom bracket, make sure to clean away any remaining dirt and apply some new grease. Also, remember to read the instructions on where each of the washers go. On my case, I need 2 on the drive side and 1 on the non-drive side. Again, tighten by hand first, and because I don't have a way to gauge a specific torque, I usually just use my own judgment. About 1 or 2 good pulls. Now we're going to remove and replace the narrow wide chainring from the old crank to the new. You can use an Allen key to remove the chainring bolts, but I find that an impact driver can make this step much easier and quicker to progress. Now that the chainring is off, you can easily clean it. Before installing the chainring, apply some Loctite to each of the bolts, a small amount. As a side note, using the same chainring bolts from your old crank, you'll find that they'll be a little too long for this setup and won't tighten properly. I would recommend purchasing some of these chainring shims, which sit perfectly flush on top of the crank and don't cost much. Tighten by hand before fully tightening. Finally, let's install the cranks. Apply grease to each of the exposed metal. Remove the bolt and the protection cap. Align the cranks so that they're 180 degrees from each other. Press fit by hand and install the tightening bolt. And finally, once the crankset's on, apply some grease before installing your pedals. Now you have an upgraded crankset with a much cleaner look to it. I'll be sure to give you guys a proper review once I get out to fully test it and to see if I run into any issues. Let me know what you guys think if you had similar problems upgrading your crankset. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.